Lore Together is proud to be part of the Boss Rush Games Network. Feel free to find out more at bossrushgames.com/network. Hi, I'm Safi.
And I'm Mystic.
And this is Lore Together. This is the podcast where a husband and wife team go over all the world building, characters, and storytelling in video games. Because it's what we like to do together. We lore together.
Yeah, and this is episode 54. Wow, it's been a while.
What do you mean?
That we've been doing this.
Yeah.
It just keeps hitting more and more each time.
It's been about as consistent in our lives as our son has. So it's kind of weird.
It poops less.
Yes, podcasts in general poop less. Where did that come from?
But before we get into the episode, if you'd like to contact us, you can do that on Twitter at LoreTogether, through Instagram at LoreTogether, and through email at LoreTogether@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support this podcast, you can do that over on patreon.com/LoreTogether, where you can pay a per episode pledge to get early access to episodes, as well as Q&As and other discussions.
Yes.
And if you like this podcast, please give us 5 stars wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify, Apple, or wherever it is.
One other thing I want to mention is that this is publicly being released before the public release of the Boss Rush podcast episode we're going to be on.
Yes.
We're actually going to be recording that tomorrow in recording timeline terms. So feel free to listen up. First of all, Boss Rush podcast, just a fun time of people chatting about gaming stuff. They literally asked if we could go on. I was like, Mystic and I don't keep up with news. And they're like, that's totally fine. And I caught up with the latest episodes, and we don't. It's just gamers talking about gaming fun stuff.
We'll figure it out.
Cool. So yeah, find us there. And then there's other cool stuff coming along. But
yep.
Follow Twitter and all that.
So we're going to delve into a genre we haven't done yet.
There's a genre we haven't done yet?
RTS.
Oh, that's correct. We have not done that.
We're going to talk about the First Tiberium War.
Oh, snap.
And that is basically the entirety of the game Command & Conquer from 1995.
Okay. So you and a friend of ours introduced me to real-time strategy, because I never really, I think my brother did a little bit of StarCraft when he was younger, but yeah, like other than, my brother playing StarCraft, I didn't really get into them until you and your friend introduced them to me, and I think they're fun with the right people,
yeah,
but I can't do it competitively, One
of the problems I had, I went through 3 or 4 different games before I settled on Command & Conquer, actually, because I wanted to do an RTS. We haven't done one.
Yeah.
Or any strategy game. And I went through a few, and many of them, of the ones that I had, do have lore, but we'd be done in 10 minutes.
All right, well, so that sounds like a bunch of mini-sodes that we'll have to release to patrons later, but for now.
Or they have no lore.
Oh.
And it's all just mechanics, and if there's races, it's like the humans, the reptilians, the android. It's like there's no...
that's annoying, yeah.
So it's all about mechanics and stuff, or balance and everything, which is fine.
Yeah.
That's still a legitimate way of playing your game, but it doesn't help me
right,
when I'm doing lore research. But then I remembered how much fun I had with Red Alert and everything, and I was like, I never played Command & Conquer, though, so let me research that. So Command & Conquer is one of the defining series of the RTS genre.
Oh, okay.
Definitely, when it first came out, it was right in that era where things were starting to be established for the genre.
Okay.
There were strategy games before that, but this is kind of the first time that it kind of all clicks really well.
Well, it's kind of like how you could technically say that Pong was the first tennis game in a video game, but, it's not. You get to Mario Tennis, and, yeah, we've definitely evolved, so.
Westwood Studios is the studio that made this, and it was published, I believe, by Virgin at the time.
Oh, the same
Branson company, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Just want to make sure, because I know he's in a lot of different industries.
I don't think Virgin Interactive exists the same. I don't know if that name exists even anymore. I think it may have been folded into another company or something. Who knows?
Right.
Westwood itself was eventually bought by EA.
Yes.
And then folded into EA Los Angeles.
Okay.
Which was eventually folded into DICE, which is another EA subsidiary.
Yes.
And then it was folded into something else. There's just a mess of bureaucratic nonsense. Command & Conquer is primarily about the war between two factions. There are other factions that come into play, but primarily we're talking about the Global Defense Initiative, also known as the GDI.
Okay. And that's, I guess, the Earth-based...
No, we're not even going to get off Earth in this one.
Oh, okay.
So we have the GDI, the Global Defense Initiative, which is spawned from the UN, and the Brotherhood of Nod, which is led by a charismatic, I guess you could say, leader named Kane.
Okay, hold on a second. The UN has an army
We'll get there.
that does things.
We'll get there.
It's a thing that comes up, tropes not only in video games but conspiracy theories as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, to say that typically means you do not understand how the UN works. So I'm just going to be coming into this with a little bit of caution.
We'll get there. There is an explanation.
All
Whether
right.
that explanation is canonical or not, I leave up to you and the listeners.
Okay. Well, yes. You know me, guys. I'm going to judge this. Judge it so much.
Have you seen the cutscenes that Command & Conquer is known for? This is definitely a tongue-in-cheek, don't take this 100% seriously.
The Red
game.
Alert ones, in particular, with Tim
They're
Curry.
not that much
George
more
Takei.
serious in Command & Conquer itself.
It should be, though. It was when we played Command & Conquer 3, so maybe that's coloring my understanding a bit.
Now, according to some fans, the second game in the series, Red Alert,
Yeah.
is actually a prequel to the first game.
Oh, interesting.
There's evidence there to back this up,
Okay.
but it's easily dismissed or retconned, and EA's official stance is that Command & Conquer and Red Alert are separate timelines. There's a whole nother timeline for Command & Conquer Generals. We're not even going to touch on that, really.
There's part of me that is still just thinking of, like, I'm going to the one place that capitalists haven't ruined yet. Space!
And I love how, like, you know that's the take that they used because it's the only one they didn't bust a gut, like, chuckling in. Like, he almost smirks. He almost breaks.
He really did. That is definitely
It's just a bunch of great, actors.
having fun.
Yeah.
Having so
Yeah.
much dumb
And-
fun. It's kind of like how the Dynasty Warriors
Yeah.
has a reputation of you get these super talented voice actors and they just ham it up because they can. They're allowed to be campy, and I think sometimes some actors like that. Anyway, moving on.
So anyway, one half of the game we're talking about today is not considered canonical according to the people who run the wiki, and therefore I assume most fans.
Yeah.
And that is the Nod campaign.
Right.
In fact, we do not get a fully canonical game until the expansion pack for the second game. That is the first time in the chronology that everything in it is considered canon.
So wait, is everything else just a fever dream of somebody in like the barracks or something?
It's all just superseded by other things that come later. Basically, there's a lot of retconning.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. A rewriting of the history books.
But
as you
suffice
will.
to say, the timeline on the wikis and everything is wonky. For instance, per Red Alert, in 1924, Albert Einstein arrives back in time.
Back in time.
He invents time travel, goes back in time to unmake Adolf Hitler and stop the rise of the Nazis. Basically, if you if you go back in time
that's
and
a
you
very delicate way of putting that.
if you go back in time and you touch someone from the past, they are erased from history, which we saw in Red Alert 3 when we played it because they wipe Einstein from history and suddenly everything goes crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So without Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union grows powerful under Stalin. Believing that it is the Soviet Union's birthright to take over the world, Stalin ordered the invasion of Western Europe. In order to resist Soviet aggression, the nations of Europe formed the Allied forces and started a guerrilla war against the invading Soviet army.
Okay.
The Allied nations successfully pushed the Soviet invaders back to Moscow, decisively ending the war. Stalin dies by suffocation under the ruins of Moscow.
Oh, wow.
Discussions within the United Nations to form a global defense agency begins. This agency would become Special Operations Group Echo Black Ops 9, which just sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook.
Yeah, seriously, a lot of gobbledygook. Also, it must have been a pretty serious war to get all of these countries to agree with all of this.
But this ends up being the predecessor to the Global Defense Initiative, which is only in the further Command & Conquer games and not in the Red Alert games. So obviously we are already just fracturing timelines everywhere.
Look,
so,
I love string theory. I think there's some validity to it, but I hate that technically it means everything can happen all at once.
Now, the Brotherhood of Nod's own mythos goes back a long time.
So,
to the biblical Cain and Abel.
Are we starting to suddenly get the Vampire the Masquerade mythology in this?
No.
Okay.
I'll leave that one for you.
I'm just saying, it's starting to sound familiar already.
Some believe Cain from the Brotherhood to be immortal and the real biblical Cain, and if so, he changed the spelling of his name.
Praise Cain.
Artifacts found in a cave below the Cairo Temple of Nod do indicate a possible link between the Brotherhood and the legend. However, whether Nod is really a 1,000-year-old group or just named themselves after the land of Nod to which Cain was banned after the murder of Abel is unknown. There is no concrete information. Though Cain himself, from the Brotherhood of Nod, does seem surprisingly indestructible in the timeline, having presumably died in mass destruction and yet still walking around later.
So this is somewhat familiar. So just to compare it to the other Cain mythology that I played in a different kind of game, the idea of the original vampire was Cain of biblical times. And in Vampire the Masquerade, there are actually like a subset of vampires who praise Cain because that's where they got their powers and that's why they're special. And instead of like doing the Vampire the Masquerade thing where you're trying to, you're doing a lot of subterfuge within human society and trying to, because you need human society to survive, Canaanites are like, we get to show off our awesome vampire powers and do crazy stuff, and we don't care because we're monsters and we earned it. Praise Cain. So it's interesting to see, the different ways that can be used in storytelling. That's all.
Much of the story of this game follows an event in 1995 where a meteor impacts at the Tiber River in Italy.
Okay.
Carrying a unique material called Tiberium.
Okay.
Once thought to be beneficial, Tiberium soon revealed itself to be extremely dangerous and infectious.
Oh, okay.
It was shown to have a mutagenic effect on trees, mutating them into bizarre plants that take on the form of fleshy stalks with a large bulb at the top.
Oh, weird.
These blossom trees continually release Tiberium spores into the air, spreading Tiberium to the surrounding area.
So it's essentially kind of its own version of a blight.
Yes. Tiberium was also shown to leach elements from the soil and surrounding plant life, and contact with it was also shown to be toxic to animal life, including humans.
Okay. This is the way the world ends.
However, Tiberium could also be processed into extremely valuable metals that could fund whole economies.
Still the way the world ends. This is still exactly the way the world ends.
There's some dispute over the name, actually, with the GDI claiming it's named for the Tiber River, and Cain claiming it was named by him, after Nod discovered it, after Tiberius Drusus Caesar.
Oh, we've always got to tie it back to the Roman Empire, don't we?
Even being insanely toxic and mutagenic, after 2 years, Nod is an economic superpower, holding 49% of the world's Tiberium stock and all the precious metals it contains.
And where is Nod located?
Yes. It's basically secret society, ancient society stuff.
Oh, man. Okay. That I'm frustrated, but okay.
This eclipses the GDI countries. Basically, Nod holds sway over countries.
Okay.
But this eclipses the GDI allied countries who just have 25% of the world stock.
Okay.
Most of this was due to Nod developing much more efficient Tiberium harvesting technology. With this much Tiberium-derived wealth at Nod's disposal, Cain makes a crucial decision. Nod would now openly contend with the GDI on all political, media, and military fronts.
So wait, they were a secret organization?
Yeah.
So
well, ancient organization that ends up just kind of being the thing. Kind of like Cerberus in Mass Effect.
So it's...
We were secret, now we're everywhere.
Yeah, but okay, but how do you manage that much, but yet then the GDI only manages 25%? Wouldn't you secretly be helping with the production values in the countries you're secretly operating in? Even if you're a private company, that's still considered part of the GDP for the country you're in? I have so many issues right now.
About the economics of it too.
I'm sorry, that's just not how we right now measure economies. We measure economies with who's operating within the walls of that city, state, nation, however you structure it, And what essentially you're telling me, well, but Nod is everywhere and Nod controls the Tiberium. Okay, but that means that if they secretly control the Tiberium, that means that they're still contributing to the GDP and the production of the countries that they operate within. That's like saying, back in the 1930s when we had prohibition in America, that's like saying, well, the mob produces 75% of the booze and only the U.S. government produces 10%. Well, duh, but the mob is producing it in the United States. So it's still 100% all United States booze. Like, that's just not how measuring this production works on an economic scale.
You've put more time and effort into this tirade than they put into the 3 seconds it's on the screen in a news clip. It's
just basic understanding. There is no way that there wasn't at least one person who took macroeconomics 101 in college and could just say, guys, there's a better way of saying this. Can we just say it differently? No. Now you make just no sense. And like your secret organization that makes it. So wait, then how do you operate in a capital? There's a lot of questions now. Like, are they all the same company secretly expanding their efforts across borders? Or are they different companies that happen to be like doing monopolistic competition with each other?
We're still in the opening cutscene and the joke part of the opening cutscene.
If you're measuring, product done by an entity outside of a nation state, you're doing a capitalism. I'm sorry. That's what you're doing. You're doing a capitalism.
Okay.
So how does it work in the capitalism?
How
does it capitalism?
I do not have that answer for you.
Okay. All right. So Safi's just going to be frustrated once again. All right. Just
you ask for things that the designers never thought of.
That's fine. I'm allowed to do that, especially as somebody who knows when that's a capitalism. You did a capitalism. Just frustrated. I'm frustrated because it's not explained well. We know nothing about the structure of Nod as an organization in any way, shape, or form is really what I'm getting at. Like that whole rant could be surmised to that. That's my frustration right now. As somebody trying to understand the story in the world. Sorry, you gotta keep on.
So he makes this decision that Nod is now going to openly contend with the GDI on all political, media, and military fronts.
Okay.
Though the Brotherhood had been extremely successful in utilizing such tactics in the past, the scale of this venture was now unlike any operation before.
Question.
Yes.
So they're gonna do media confrontation.
Yes.
Okay.
This is, I think.
But if they secretly were operating, were they doing it under the guise of their corporations or organizations that were producing this Tiberium?
I think it's like, in Red Alert, there is this little bit about Kane being with the Soviets.
Well, if you're somebody who's trying to...
And so I think they're going for an analogy like getting political, NATO political. And Russia, like that whole thing where you have allied blocks and everything.
The difference is they're trying to suggest that Nod doesn't have land, specifically the land of Nod. Nadia, Noddington, Nodistan. But like nothing of that nature.
I think it's literally like we control 49% of the sites where Tiberium is.
But through what vehicles? Like, if
Harvesters.
They're not... Mr. Pedantic, what I mean. With what social organization type are they controlling these?
That I don't know.
Yeah, okay. That's... And forever frustrated now. I'm sorry. I'll let you continue.
Well, you're gonna hate this next line though, because
great.
Nod begins to consolidate control over its territory and build up its military.
What territory? We have not explained what the territory. It's one thing to say this is like the 3-second clip before you get in there and you start like doing an RTS.
Right.
But I would just think there would have to be a timeline that would more succinctly explain the way Nod actually influenced everything. Because with the information you're given right now, there's nothing to suggest that they would have the power that they have.
So essentially Nod is classified by the GDI, which of course take it as you want.
Okay.
as a terrorist group.
Okay, so they are an organization.
It has the characteristics of a religious movement, a multinational corporation, and a nation state. They do have these elements to them.
You said 3 different types of organization to me that have 3 different ways of operating.
The problem is you're asking for something that I don't think exists. Literally, the Nod wiki entry goes from the Cain and Abel thing to the meteor in 95 and not having scientists being able to look into it.
So there's no good explanation. There's no background as to why they're able to
just evil shadow
have
organization.
A claim. It's not a shadow organization if they're actually affecting 50% of gross product of the world in an economic scale. You can't be a shadow organization and have that much control unless you have some sort of front. Nobody's explained that to me. I'm just gonna sit here and just be mad about it, I guess. Right here in front of this microphone. I'm just gonna die mad about it.
All right. We haven't even gotten to the war yet. Can I start?
Apparently not. I don't even know how we're getting to a war period, but okay, fine. Yeah, let's do this.
You're really hung up on this one point, and it's an important point.
No, it's not one point. I don't see it as one point. It's a big plot hole. It's a humongous plot hole.
Is it?
I think it's one of the hugest plot holes that we've dealt with, and I'm willing to step over some huge plot holes. I've stepped over some names that should never existed ever in any language whatsoever. But it's a big plot hole in the sense that if you're going to make a claim that something is that powerful, but also that unknown, you have to know what the cover story was and why they were able to take over. It's not even anything that needs more than a sentence. One sentence of an explanation.
Well, if I missed it, please let us know through the context stuff I told you before.
Okay, because it's driving me insane. Like, it just doesn't make any sense why they're this important to me. But I get it. We haven't even gotten to the actual war yet. Okay, we can get to that point.
Nod begins to consolidate control over its territory. However they're influencing it, whatever leads to it,
and proud we are of all of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they build up a military thanks to its economic might and requisition of sympathetic nations' assets.
Okay. Sympathetic nations' assets makes sense.
Yes.
In a nebulous way. I still wish there was more explanation as to what exactly we mean, but okay.
Nod supporters enacted regular military operations in Niger and Gabon in Africa and in the nations of Eastern Europe, west of Russia, with only a few exceptions, such as Ukraine.
Okay. So essentially they went to places that probably had more need for strengthening their political prowess, I guess.
As the GDI responded in kind, many formally aligned countries distanced themselves from both Nod and GDI.
What?
Leading to a considerable retraction in the total scope of both organizations over the period leading to the war. This particularly hurt Nod in Africa, where the vast majority of nations that were earlier considered Nod aligned distanced themselves from Nod.
Interesting.
And this is the thing, like, Nod is, I think, more like religious message doctrine.
Okay.
And the political machines in the countries slowly align themselves through whatever will of the people, quote unquote, happens. Because we don't cover it because it's technically non-canonical. But during the Nod campaign in Africa, there is discussion of how all these countries were swayed toward Nod in the first part because of either despotic warlords or poor infrastructure or whatever. And of course, we're using a very broad brush there.
Right, and we're talking about countries who've been ravaged by the machine of colonialism.
Right.
You know, so like let's be kind to these people when we think about these kinds of decisions they're making.
Yeah, and there's this idea that Nod has kind of like wormed its way in as being the voice of the downtrodden. And so these countries align themselves with it. What Nod is outside of that, I do not know.
Okay.
But that might give you some idea of how they have territory in that regard.
Well, I mean, and the more I think about it, it's a huge plot hole, but it's a huge plot hole that's easy for somebody who just wants to get into an RTS to step over.
Yeah.
But for me, part of the reason an RTS is interesting is kind of like...
What led us here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which we're getting, like, there is stuff of we're getting there, but yeah, there are some things that aren't really delved into. And I think it's because it's just like, oh, this organization controls this, GDI controls this, go. And here's the events. Like, it's how far back do you go in your intro sequence, you know?
Well, but it's not just like the intro sequence. It's just kind of like we have done games where you think it's just like kind of like a shoot 'em up rough and dirty thing, but there's actually a really good and engaging story. I mean, when we're talking about Unreal,
yeah,
that was surprisingly deep. And I just think that we've been doing a huge variety of games with a lot of depth and a lot of decent explanation, as much as like some of it is fantastical or not necessarily probable, but it's got some sort of heft to it to hold it along.
Again, this could be in this. Again, Red Alert was designed originally as a prequel. This information could be in there, but since it's not considered canonical for the Tiberium timeline, I didn't delve into it.
Okay.
After a series of high-profile urban bombings, including the Grain Trade Center in Vienna, the 17th target to be hit, and following reports of terrorist activities in Slovenia, the United Nations Security Committee entered a closed session and permitted GDI to engage NOD openly.
Okay, so now we're at a full war, so it's essentially like a world war.
Yeah.
Okay.
When the UN gave permission for the GDI to openly engage Nord forces globally and the war began, most of continental Western Europe, with the exception of Switzerland, Denmark, and possibly Spain and Portugal, declared in favor of the GDI. Against them were arrayed a narrow belt of Eastern European countries, so the GDI began their European campaign in the north with an amphibious assault on NOD-controlled Estonia. Spoiler, we won't be getting out of Europe.
I completely expected that. Completely and utterly didn't expect there to be any focus outside of Europe.
Well, again, the non-canonical
Stuff.
NOD campaign is all in Africa.
Right, so it's not in Europe, exactly.
Right.
So...
And there is a separate game entirely that covers a tiny bit of the Tiberium War, and we'll cover that at the end.
Okay, that's fair.
And we're basically going to be breezing through a lot of missions to hit points.
Right. I'm not here to go mission by mission.
We'll be going mission by mission because it all lays out a path, but we're going to not cover all the different weapons and all the different tactics and all that stuff.
Okay, that's fair.
So,
I think that's fair.
Having successfully gained a beachhead in Estonia, GDI forces would then launch an extensive assault on the NOD Tiberium refinery in Estonia, driving NOD forces out of the country and securing it for the GDI. They would then proceed to destroy the NOD SAM sites in Latvia, freeing GDI air power to be freely used against the NOD forces in the Baltic region. They were thus able to secure Latvia and Lithuania for the GDI. Now, through all of that, we're under the command of Mark Jameson Shepard, who is basically our direct commander.
Shepard!
He leaves to depart for the UN, and the man who is now the provisional commander of the GDI forces in Latvia, James Solomon, has to make a crucial decision. Whether to move the bulk of his forces through NOD Belarus, which somebody mispronounces as Belarus.
Who says Belarus? Who said Belarus? That's just... I pity the fool who said Belarus.
So in this game, so they do get actors for subsequent games, but in this game, from what I remember, all of the video is developers.
Okay, so that's just developers coming in. It's kind of like what they did with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice.
Yeah.
The only difference is they weren't as good at it.
It's also much earlier.
Yeah, it's much earlier too. But Belarus. What?
Okay, so
Sorry.
basically move the bulk of forces through NOD-controlled NOD-controlled
You're about to do it yourself. Yeah. No.
Through NOD-controlled Belarus in order to eventually aid Ukraine against the NOD assault, or whether to move them into NOD-controlled Poland instead in order to outmaneuver the NOD onslaught on Germany. It should be noted,
Oh, man.
James Solomon is us. That's the player character. We don't see him until the second game, where he is played by James Earl Jones.
Yes! Nice! I love it.
So
James Earl Jones, always a great choice for anything where you need a voice.
Yeah. And that's where we start getting like more known actors into the franchise as you go.
Yeah, that's a really hard choice.
Yep.
Because there's a good argument for both. I don't know. I would be tempted to say more Poland just because strategically where it is on a map.
Then. I had both on here, so we're just going to do one of them.
We're only doing one of them?
You want me to cover both?
Please cover both.
Okay.
I will.
It diverges and then converges.
Okay.
So, had Solomon invaded Belarus. Moving into Nod Belarus, GDI forces under the command of Solomon retrieved stolen nuclear rods from a Nod base there. At the same time, two smaller forces moved into Poland, retrieving more stolen GDI nuclear rods from another base and, more significantly, gaining control of the town of Białystok in Poland, and then defending it against a Nod counterattack. This event would then be used by Nod supporters to create the Białystok scandal.
Oh.
With control of Belarus secured, the GDI force moved to reinforce neutral Ukraine, which was under Nod attack. By reinforcing the besieged base in Ukraine, they helped drive the invading Nod forces from Ukraine. With a common enemy, Ukraine swiftly enlisted into the GDI.
Okay.
Now, not a lot changes, but there is some change if we go to Poland. Had Solomon invaded Poland, the GDI forces move into Poland and they aid the rebellious city of Białystok against an attempt by Nod to regain control. Meanwhile, a small force of GDI moved into Belarus to regain a second group of rods, but they didn't proceed further.
Okay.
Their invasion of Poland, however, would be used by Nod supporting media to create the Białystok scandal. Again, we'll get to Białystok in a minute.
All right.
Nod forces advancing from Denmark, Austria, and Poland have now conquered the entirety of Germany, yet by advancing from Poland and reinforcing two besieged bases in Germany, the GDI was still able to deal a decisive defeat to Nod forces and regain Germany in addition to advancing to Denmark, so we don't get Ukraine there.
Right. Ukraine, yeah.
So Białystok, real place, the largest city in northeast Poland and the 10th largest city in Poland.
Right. Okay.
With Germany retaken and not Denmark occupied, the GDI turned their attention to the Czech Republic and Austria, spearheaded by a commando raid on a key Nod airbase in the Czech Republic. GDI forces were able to then drive Nod forces from that nation. However, things take a turn for the worse for the GDI. When reports created by Nod and spread by the WWN reporter Greg Burdett convinced the United Nations that the GDI had carried out a massacre against the population of the Polish town of Białystok on suspicion of them being Tiberium smugglers.
Oh, no. That is a big deal.
Yeah. The UN immediately began an investigation and cut GDI's funding, but even so, a GDI commander managed to stop a Nod counterattack on a poorly defended outpost in Austria near Salzburg.
Now, for anybody who wasn't alive in the 90s, there was a lot of stuff like this happening around like Eastern European stuff. Like if you remember the horrors of Kosovo and like all of that, there's a lot. So this is a very current topic and idea that would have resonated with a lot of players who would be thinking about that as a front. So it makes sense that not only are we in these parts of Europe, but we have a scandal specifically like this where there's a slaughter of seemingly innocents, even if they're just smuggling Tiberium. You know.
At the same time, another GDI commander defended Ignacio Morbus in Slovakia against a Nod onslaught. Ignacio Mobius had arrived in Slovakia and established a hospital there to aid victims of Tiberium poisoning because these spores are toxic.
Right.
People die from this.
Yeah.
It also causes a bunch of other problems for people when they get in contact with Tiberium.
Right. That makes sense.
And naturally, this had become a target for Nod forces because when news of Mobius's hospital spread, the majority of the Slovakian people abandoned Nod and GDI was able to secure the area. Basically, great propaganda.
Yeah, exactly.
And having now secured Slovakia and Austria, the GDI now planned to move into Hungary, attempting to use their naval supremacy to send relatively small armed and heavily armed gunboats up the river Danube in order to destroy strategic Nod bases. They planned ahead, they did some prep, they took out some turrets, but Kane had already preempted this and put a new installation called an Obelisk of Light. Basically, this is like a giant laser turret along the river.
Oh, wow.
And as soon as the gunboats arrived at the base, they're just obliterated.
Oh, man, that's awful.
Yeah. The GDI forces had to change their plan, so they switched to ground forces, and they assault this base. They basically take it out, despite the fact this Obelisk of Light is still hitting them.
Oof.
But they're not sitting ducks on the river. They're able to outmaneuver. And with the river Danube under GDI control, GDI forces were able to drive Nod forces out of Hungary and secure it as well.
Right.
So finally, now that Hungary is done, the Białystok scandal finally just comes to an end. The investigation ends and everything, UA funding to the GDI is restored, and it could be argued that the funding cut wasn't devastating. I mean, the organization is largely funded by Tiberium at this point.
Wow, yeah.
But it's definitely a political and ideological blow for the GDI.
Right.
Greece had formerly been aligned with the GDI and had withdrawn its support mostly because of this scandal.
Yeah.
And after remaining neutral for some time, it fell under Nod control. The GDI placed a key agent in Greece, though, codenamed Delphi, which is funny if you know your Greek history.
Oh, interesting.
And
yeah.
so Delphi is a place in Greece. In ancient Greece, there was the oracle at Delphi.
Yes. Exactly.
And through Delphi, GDI gathered much vital information about the Brotherhood, about its biological research facilities, and its forces. After extracting him, the GDI was able to use his intel to swiftly regain control of Greece. We just blew through like three battles there.
Okay.
As GDI forces advanced into Bulgaria and Albania, though, the Nod counterattack proved to be fierce. As they had done in Slovakia, GDI set up hospitals for victims of Tiberium poisoning in each of the countries, which also doubled as research centers. Ignacio Mobius himself led one hospital, while the other was led by a GDI scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding their importance, the Nod counterattack closed in on the hospitals, intending to destroy them and kill the scientists.
Of course.
Due to the proliferation of Nod-SAM sites in the region, GDI was initially unable to evacuate the scientists by helicopter as they had planned. So basically they had to do this offensive, take out the SAM sites, and then they can rescue the scientists.
Right.
They were all moved to a safer location. As news of the Nod attack on the hospital spread, GDI couldn't have asked for better propaganda at this point.
Right, exactly.
Agent Delphi had discovered the apparent location of Kane, who was overseeing research at a Nod bioresearch facility in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia.
Okay.
At the same time, the G had just regained control of the ion cannon, basically this giant space weapon, from Nod hackers. It was once again able to aid GDI forces, and with the help of the ion cannon, GDI forces were able to level the bioresearch facility and apparently kill Kane.
Nice.
But Kane proved to be a difficult man to kill.
Yes, and therein lies the rumors of immortality / is he a vampire?
Well, we're not there yet. It soon became clear to the GDI that he had left the facility sometime before its destruction.
Oh, okay.
At the same time, Nod forces were continuing their full-scale retreat towards Bosnia. The pursuing GDI forces were able to destroy an entire convoy of Nod vehicles before they could join the rest of the Nod forces in Bosnia, and GDI forces would swiftly gain control of Yugoslavia as the Nod forces continued their retreat. Nod's remaining European forces were retreating toward Nod's nuclear-armed European Temple of Nod in Bosnia.
Say that 5 times fast.
No.
Oh my gosh. That just sounds like a complicated, like, hot, hip party spot.
Right.
In the middle of, like...
There's a lot of red and black, too.
But, yeah, but it's not in the middle of New York City. It's, like, in the middle of some obscure town in the Midwest.
Right.
Yeah, that's why the title's so long.
Shafter, Illinois.
Is that a place?
Yeah, it's, like, 6 houses, and that's it.
6 houses and this happening spot with the industrial music going, unce, 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 unce. Yeah.
It was believed by both sides that within this temple was Kane himself. GDI forces would launch an offensive on the temple. Meanwhile, this is a nuclear-armed temple.
But you can't give hugs with nuclear arms, Mystic.
Oh, God.
And then, if you had not heard that one, that's also something, because we were getting out of the Cold War, so you heard all of this, like, Cold War anxiety stuff that was happening when you were a kid in the 90s. And you'd still hear things like that, people still being very much worried about nuclear armament. So we went to Nuke Church.
Having already launched an offensive and damaged the temple, the GDI's ion cannon fired at the damaged temple and obliterated it. Not only did the GDI destroy the temple, they also destroyed the Nod forces in the vicinity to a man, gaining control of Bosnia, the last European nation openly loyal to Nod. While both the Brotherhood and the GDI believe that Kane had died in the blast, it was unconfirmed. Now, that's the end of the war.
Right.
We didn't cover anywhere else in the world.
Right.
And the GDI campaign is only about Europe. And as I said, the non-canonical Nod campaign is about their near total conquest of Africa ending in South Africa, where they establish a new temple there.
Wait, what? They go across the entire continent? For
Pretty
real?
much, yeah.
That's huge.
Right.
That is, like, I can't imagine conquering that much space.
As for other areas of the world, we know very little about the other major superpowers. However, they are present in the other timelines.
Okay.
Red Alert heavily features Russia, America, and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Generals, Command and Conquer Generals, features China and Africa some more, actually.
Okay.
And they
Did they say specifically what parts of Africa? Because the campaign, you say, went basically north to south the whole continent, it sounds
Seems like it, yeah.
But I don't know if there's specific countries they mentioned in that.
They do. We did mention Niger. We mentioned Gabon. There's a couple other countries mentioned. It's not just Africa is the country.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you.
All these places just aren't in the First Tiberium War, with one exception. There is a single game that we'll touch on here that does bring us a bit of information about the last days of the war outside of the European theater.
Mm-hmm.
As GDI scored victories in Europe, Captain Nick Parker took part in a battle in Mexico to rid prisoners and civilians from a Nod indoctrination camp.
Oh.
One of the few, though definitely not the only battle that took place outside of Africa and Europe. This was a mission from Command & Conquer Renegade, which is a third-person action game.
Okay.
The operation was a decisive success despite early GDI losses and may have kept the war from spreading into Central America and down into South America.
Nice.
So,
great. Awesome.
the First Tiberium War ended with a decisive GDI victory following the destruction of the Temple of Nod and Cain's apparent death. This was followed by the splintering of Nod into multiple different factions.
Yep, and that's always a very dangerous thing to happen when you break something that big, even when you don't know its nebulous origins.
The war had the effect of establishing Nod and GDI on the world stage, since it forced countries worldwide to either unite under GDI or Nod banners. However, its most lasting consequence was that it established the importance of Tiberium, since none of the spectacular successes gained by either Nod or GDI would have been possible without this resource. Tiberium itself continued to exact a heavy toll on the human race during and after the First Tiberium War. Its expansion across the globe continued exponentially through its spore-like spread.
So even if you were trying not to use it anymore as a resource, it's just inescapable in this world. Okay.
Until much of the world was uninhabitable to normal humans, and Tiberium would even begin to distort the human bloodline itself. Mutated humans would in time become known as the Forgotten, but we'll touch on them when we sometime cover the Second Tiberium War.
Oh, so that's another episode at another time.
Yep.
Okay. Well.
And you get to play this next week.
No, I'm fine with playing it next week.
We have the remastered version.
Ooh, so it's shinier.
It's less pixely. That's about it.
Okay.
And there's
fair.
a lot, like if you're a fan of this game, I would recommend the remastered version because there's a lot of like behind the scenes stuff. You can see like early green screen shots, test cuts of the actors and
okay,
everything. Yeah.
cool. Okay, that's awesome.
But yeah, that's the First Tiberium War.
Well, that's a doozy.
So thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Catch us on our live streams.
Yep. What are we doing now? Everybody's gone to the Rapture.
So yeah, our patrons hopefully will hear this before everybody's gone to Rapture, the next one we're doing. But this releases the Saturday before. We will play this on our Thursday live stream, 9 p.m. Central. Yay!
And now I gotta start working the next episode. Yay!
Yay! You don't know what it is yet?
I don't know what it is yet.
Okay. Well, there's plenty to choose
I'm gonna have to
from.
toss another episode at you soon too.
Yay! I have an idea, but
We do
yay.
love doing this. It's just research is work.
Research is work and figuring out who's watching Little Buddy for hours on end.
Yeah.
So,
But thank you for listening.
thanks so much. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.